Eastern-like teachings into modern psychology. This really got developed in what's called transpersonal psychology in the 1960s and 70s, Ken Wilber being a major force there. The idea that a lot of our personal psychological problems are really transpersonal in nature. It's not just my problem, it's our problem in a sense, and we've got to operate at a higher consciousness level than just my own individual consciousness to get beyond our problems. Finally, we'll mention a revival of interest in ancient Gnosticism. This has been seen in a lot of different areas in the last few decades. One of the common ways in the field Greg and I tend to work in is the interest in ancient Gnostic texts, what a lot of folks have called the lost gospels of Christianity. So the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas made big headlines a couple years ago when it was finally found an actual document of this text that we know had existed, but we never had seen the text until 2 years ago. What's interesting or in common about these documents is they talk about Jesus. They're Gospels that claim to have revelation of the teachings of Jesus, but all of them have a twist on their presentation of Jesus. Jesus comes across more as a kind of a New Age master than he does the Jesus of the Gospels that we're familiar with in our Bible. So the interest in these texts has spawned and fueled, I think, for some people, a sort of New Age take, an ancient Gnostic take on Christianity. As you can see, just by the short list, we could multiply this list endlessly by different streams of thought that work into this thing. But you put all this together, this sort of way of thinking, you've got what we call broadly the New Age movement. Let me end by pointing out what they all particularly have in common. What sort of binds together the various streams of thought? And I'll use the word monism to describe what it is they have in common. Another term might be pantheism. Pantheism simply means, pan means all, theos, Greek word for God. All is God. Monism basically argues that all is one. If you understand those two terms, you'll understand the heart of what binds together New Age thought. All is one, all is God, or divine. So for New Age thought, pantheism is a central hinge to this whole thing. In this way of thinking, the highest reality, ultimate reality, is one. That's a key linchpin to understanding Hinduism, Buddhism, and various forms of what we now today call New Age thought. If all is one and all is divine, that means you and I, which are part of what's all, are divine. And that's how New Agers get to the idea that I am God, you are God. They can say that because they believe everything is divine. This is God too. Whatever is one and is God, so all things are divine. What the human problem becomes, therefore, is that you and I don't know we're divine. We've forgotten that we're divine. And so the cure or the solution, the salvific path for New Age religion is waking up to what's already true about us, becoming aware of the unity of all things and embracing our divine self, our higher self. Most New Age systems believe that this will not usually happen for most people in one lifetime. And so reincarnation is typically an important part of New Age teaching. It usually takes many lifetimes for a single soul to be embodied numerous times in order to finally wake up to its true self. Once you find that true self, different religions give it different names, nirvana, satori, Hinduism, Buddhism call it different things, but it's the same basic realization of the melting away of my personal identity and my recognition that I'm part of the great universal one, the higher consciousness. This is salvation. This is all we need. Jesus' life, death, and resurrection are not needed for salvation. At best, what Jesus was is another master trying to teach us that we're all one and we're all God. At least that's usually how Jesus gets spun in New Age teaching. So some of the diversity, the fundamental unity that holds this thing together.
That's the background, the broad scope of the New Age movement. Now I want to talk about Eckhart Tolle. who right now is kind of the premier representative of this thing that is called the New Age movement. I first heard about this guy about 3 months ago, 2 months ago, somewhere on there. People started asking questions about me. Have you heard about this new book, The New Reality, or the New Earth? And I hadn't. They were expressing some concern over it and whatever, and Oprah Winfrey began to promote this book and had an online course that people could take about this book. And so the questions kept on increasing. And then I began to hear about Christians who were starting to praise this book. And really think this is wonderful, because Oprah herself is been very out loud and explicit, saying she is a Christian, and yet she finds this book to be completely complementary to her Christian faith, and even to have helped her Christian faith. And that's when I really began to be concerned enough to say, I got to read this book. So on my way out to California, 6 weeks ago, whatever, I bought a copy in the airport and read it, and wrote a little review about it on my blog, and I've looked into it some. And so I'm just going to do a little overview of this book. It has been, once Oprah got behind it, and this shows you something about her incredible influence these days. The first class that they held, there was a 10-week class they held with Eckhart, had 500,000 people viewing in, and that set a record. It was been hailed as the largest internet event up to that time. But by week 5, they had 1 million people, a class of 1 million people each week, talking with Oprah and Eckhart Tolle. His book sales went through the ceiling. It was number 1 on the Amazon.com for some time. It's been the best-selling book in the history of Barnes & Noble. It sold 3.5 million in 1 month, which completely set a record for them. I've never had a book come quite that close. How about you, Paul? Anything come close enough? So, this is really something. His name really, he was born Ulrich Tolle, not Eckhart Tolle, but he changed it because of his admiration for Meister Eckhart, who was a mystic in the Middle Ages. Growing up, he was a person who was very nervous, had a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. By the age of 29, he was in a state of despair. And he talks about this in his book, The Power of Now, about how he woke up one morning and it was in such despair and a state of anxiety that he planned on killing himself. And as he was contemplating that, something happened. And he had what he now calls a mystical experience, where he heard a voice in his head saying, "Resist nothing." And then he had this, the way he describes it is his mind shut down. He stopped thinking. And when his mind shut down and he stopped thinking, he had this incredible euphoria, feeling one with all things. He passed out, and the next day he woke up and says that he had a permanent shift of consciousness because of that experience, where he realized that the secret to everything is staying in the present moment, aware that you are one with all things. Just don't think about the past, don't think about the future, and you are totally at peace. There's other ways of explaining that experience other than thinking that he had an absolute contact with the divine. For example, there's a number of therapists who would describe that as a dissociative disorder, where the mind under pressure snaps and you bifurcate and you create a false self and a true self, which is exactly how he speaks. His false self is the self that identifies himself with as an individual over and against other individuals, but his true self is the one that's one with all things. He identifies his false self. He calls it the pain body, the pain body, and so one could see this as a psychological breakdown whereby he disassociated from all that was painful in order to survive. Or some would say it could have been a demonic experience that he had. But in any case, that's what got him down this road, and now he feels the universe calling him to help usher in a new age with these insights. What I'd say at the start of